A couple of years ago, I flew home to visit family. I would be there for about a week and then we would head to the coast for a week, and then back home for another week. I totally needed this break. I had just ended an on-again, off-again relationship. Like seriously, one day on and the next off. It took 7 months of putting up with it because you're supposed to fight for what is important to you, right? Anyhow, I finally just said that it was done. No more chances, no trying to work it out, just done. So with that chapter of my life being over, I was more than happy to be somewhere else, surrounded by family, and begin putting myself back together. Got there, spent a couple of days sleeping a lot. My mother's a nurse and she was becoming concerned that there was something physically wrong with me. I just needed a couple days in a safe place, where I could let my brain work on digesting the new life I would have when I got back home. So, before we left for the coast, I met up with a friend from grade school that I had kept in contact with over the years. I thought it would just be he and I, but it didn't really faze me that another person was there. We hung out for a while and then I needed to head home because I had to take a backwoods route to get home, or take a different route that would add another 20 miles onto my track. Being backwoods, I needed to be able to keep an eye out for deer. So I said goodbye and told my friend's friend that if he was ever in my neck of the woods, look me up and we would grab a drink and hang out. I told him to grab my number from my friend and out the door that I went. About halfway home, I get this weird, queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. So I slowed way down and sure enough, there is a deer in the middle of the road. Because I had slowed down, I could see another car out on the road. I couldn't shake the queasy feeling, so I figured it would be better to cut off and go down the main road, because there were more places to stop. I seriously didn't want to stop in some rural farmer's driveway. I've watched too many movies to make that mistake. So, I get over to the main road and pull into a gas station, and I sit there for a couple of minutes, trying not to get sick to my stomach. I ran into the store, grabbed some water and ginger ale, and came back out to my vehicle, still unable to shake that queasy feeling. So, I started to head home from the gas station and knew I didn't want to go straight home. So, I drove around, taking this road or that road, until that weird feeling started to go away. And then I went home, read for a bit, and then went to sleep. Next day, everything was fine and we headed off to the coast. Fast forward 2 weeks. The trip is over and I'm still feeling a little bit fragile over the breakup, but that's all. I figured I would begin the process of cleansing the environment of negative energies, and then work through the baggage that came from the breakup. I knew there was a lot and that it would take time. So the next day, I'm going about my business and everything as cool as can be, when picking through the junk left behind after a breakup. I'm really just doing mindless things to zone out and not to have to think too much on the activity, since my brain was working full-time already. A little bit later in the day, my phone rings. I don't get a lot of calls, so I assumed that there might be a family emergency, and that I needed to answer it ASAP. The area code of the caller, who is not in my contacts, is the same as my cousin, so I answered without a second thought. On the other end was my friend's friend, S.A., the acquaintance that I met at my friend's house. It's a little weird to have him be calling me, but I'm not thinking that anything is terribly out of the ordinary. I asked him what was up and he said that he was at the airport. I still find it a little odd but say, "Oh, that's cool. Where are you going?" He said that he had already landed. Again, I'm distracted and really just want to get him off the phone so I could go back to my mental sidestep and zone out while my brain chugged away. So I said that I hoped that he had a good time wherever he was. He said that he needed me to pick him up. What? Did you say you needed me to pick you up? Yeah, he replied. I came to visit you. I paused there for a second. I know for a fact that I didn't show any more interest in him than general courtesy. Even the tossed over the shoulder look me up comment was one of those polite things to say because you never actually plan on seeing them again. "Why did you come to visit me?" I asked. He said that he felt a deep connection and wanted to be with me. I'm starting to get angry as well as freaked out at this stage. I told him that I didn't feel the connection at all, and couldn't believe that he would fly across country to see someone that he had spent maybe 2 hours with. He said that I had invited him when I said to look him up. I said, no, I don't think so. That's just a polite thing to say to some random person that has made a very small impression on me. He said that he needed to find a way back home then since I had misled him. Misled him? What the heck? Look me up if you're ever in my neck of the woods had led him to think that was the basis for any sort of encounter that was meaningful. He said that he needed a place to stay until he could get the money for a plane ticket back. I said that there were more than enough hotels that he could stay at while he got himself sorted out. He said that he didn't have any money after buying the random one-way plane ticket. So at this stage, I'm flabbergasted angry and freaked out that someone would do that on a one-way ticket. I finally caved and said that he could stay the night while he sorted everything out, but I expected him to be gone no later than the morning of the day after tomorrow. So I bring him to my place, throw pillows and a blanket on the couch, and turn to head to my bedroom, and he asks if he can sleep with me. I'm like, no way that's going to happen. So I point out that I have firearms and do not attempt to come in. The next day, I have to work, so I woke him up and told him to get up and find a way home immediately. I also told him that I had to work, but I would check in on his progress because the next morning, I was dropping him off at the airport regardless of whether or not he had a way back. I went to work and he blew up my phone all day. Wanted me to come back to my place for lunch. Told him that I couldn't and that I was way too busy. I finally got home from work and I'm chuckling at a text that I got about my dog. And that's when I noticed that he had rearranged everything. And by everything, I mean every room of the house had been rearranged. I flipped my lid. I asked him why he thought it was normal to do anything that he did. Instead of answering, he asked me who I had been talking to. I said that it really wasn't any of his business, but I had received a text from the guy watching my dog while I was on vacation. Color me shocked when he says that he doesn't want me to talk to that guy. I'm no longer freaked, but full force apocalyptic disaster is about to be unleashed and leave nothing but a smoking crater. The temperature drops about 10 degrees and I very calmly said to get his stuff, and I was calling a cab to take him to the airport because he's a complete psycho. Side note, full rage had been achieved when it feels like the temperature drops and I speak very calmly. If I'm complaining about something, it's a quick burn. If I go monotone calm and tilt my head to one side slightly, that's where I hit Arctic level anger. So, he unaware of the environmental change that has occurred, and that the chances of survival are dropping by the second, decides to tell me that he used my computer and got my ex's phone number, and they both agree that I was just heartless. We're fast approaching the epic scale disaster, and he finally seems to notice how deep into rage I had sunk. I told him it was unlikely that he had gotten into my computer, because it's a full quote of a part of The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and that he would have had to have been the processing power of the Hadron Collider computers, and it was obvious that that was not the case. I told him that he had 3 minutes to get his stuff and get out, or I wouldn't be responsible for what would occur. So, still yelling insults at me, he gathered his stuff up and he left. I used to get calls and texts from him. I would block one and 6 more would pop up, but it eventually stopped. To this day, I have no idea, nor interest in knowing where he's at or if he made it back. This happened to me when I was about 14. I was best friends with this girl Robin. We've long since parted ways, but I used to stay over at hers all the time. Robin was an only child to an older couple, both roughly about 60. Her house was old and the bedrooms were quite small. She had a thing for decorating her room and spooky things. It was overcrowded with trinkets and clothes, which looked really cool, but it meant that after we were finished watching trashies and 90s anime, you know, the good stuff, at 4 o'clock in the morning I would go to sleep in the spare bedroom, or I would risk suffocating under a pile of gothic teddy bears and Pokemon on her floor. One evening, her parents went to the local pub just down the street with some old friends, so I stayed over. It was great. A free house for just the two of us, and they made sure that we had all the junk food that we could want. They were really sweet and always made sure that we felt safe before leaving. I should also mention that they never brought guests home, especially when their daughter had a friend over. For the most part, I had a great night. When it was time to eventually go to sleep, I went into what I called my room because I was there so often. It was small and just fit a wardrobe, a dresser, and a double bed, which, considering I had a single bed and shared a room with my sister, it was luxury. We would usually spend another hour sending each other DS PictoChat messages until one of us fell asleep. I curled up into bed and passed out pretty quick. Sometime around 4 a.m., I think, I awoke to someone fidgeting at the door handle. At first, I was a bit confused as Robin would always almost message me through PictoChat if she was going to come into my room. The door was rattling at this stage and I was a bit freaked. It lasted a couple of minutes, but then the rattling subsided. I rolled over and tried to calm myself down, thinking that it might have been her dad or mom making sure the door was closed. I don't know, I was confused. I'm not sure at this point if I fell asleep or what, but I didn't hear anyone entering the room. And then I hear this splashing sound. I remember thinking it was really loud and clear, and as these seconds went by, I realized this wasn't a part of a dream. This was something I was actually hearing. So, as I was facing the wall, I rolled my head around as silently as I could, and I could see this very tall man next to my bed, facing the corner. He was so close to me. He was tall, at least 6'3", and he had a thick black short haircut, and he was incredibly pale and toned. He looked to be in his early 30s or something, and he was wearing nothing but a pair of black boxers. What in the world? There was no way this could be her dad. While he was almost as tall as this guy, her dad was visibly older, had silver hair, and the top of his head was bald. There was no way anyone could confuse him with this guy. I was in shock. I had no idea what was happening, and I remember feeling my heart in my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I just stared in shock for a couple of seconds and then, as quiet as I could, turned back around and just pretended to be asleep. I remember trying to control my breathing so he wouldn't notice me. Eventually he left and I was awake for what felt like an hour, too afraid to move. I didn't know who this guy was and if he was still outside my door. Did he see me? If he saw me, what would he do? I didn't hear anyone else in the house. There was no talking and the walls in this house were paper thin. When I eventually worked up the nerve, I darted into Robin's room and broke down. I was panicking and she just kept laughing at me, saying I was being ridiculous. I was lying. I was just having a nightmare. She told me to go back to bed, and I refused to go into the room. I didn't feel safe. She rolled her eyes and we both went into the room. She looked around and suddenly started shrieking. She had just stepped into a puddle of pee. I told you, it was everywhere. It was on the wardrobe, on the dresser, and soaked into the carpet. At that point, she was just as confused as I was. Even so, it was 5 a.m., so she grabbed my pillow and blanket from the room, and I gladly took my chance with the teddy avalanche and slept on her floor. The next morning, I remember being incredibly wary of her dad. There was no other male figure around, and they weren't the kind of people to have people over, especially when their daughter had guests over. So I directed my fear and confusion at him. I knew it wasn't him though, but at that point, I was just so anxious around any kind of male figure. I remember sitting around the breakfast table and Robin still wasn't sure what to make of it. Somehow part of her didn't want to believe me, even when she saw the evidence for herself. I didn't say anything to her parents, and neither did she. I went home scared, confused, and out of my friends and family, no one seemed to believe me. It wasn't until recently that I retold the story to a group of friends and my best friend, who I was friends with at the time, and they reacted with, "Wait, that was real? We all thought you were just making it up." Later on, my sister told me that the houses in the area are connected through the attics, and that you can get from one house to another. Maybe somebody crawled through there and gotten in. But why were they almost naked? And did they know that I was there? I never really understood what happened. Needless to say, I never slept in that room and never slept alone in that house ever again. So yeah, person who broke into my room and peed all over the place. I hope I don't see you again. I was just recently reminded of this story by another hitchhiking story on here. My dad used to tell me and my brother all sorts of stories from his youth hitchhiking down the East Coast. There are two that have always really stuck with me, and I figured if you guys like this one, I'll talk about the other one too. When my dad was 15, he left home in Massachusetts and hitchhiked down to Florida, where his older sister was living in Daytona. This event apparently happened on his trip somewhere in Virginia. He had been trying to hitch a ride outside of some city, though he could never remember which one. This happened in '76, and there were a lot of drugs done between then and now. And this really nice car stopped and picked him up. He and the driver get to talking, and the guy tells my dad that he's a surgeon at one of the local hospitals. He gives him a business card and tells him, if he ever needs anything at that hospital, to give them his name. All seems to be going well, and he is apparently heading pretty far south for some family function, so it's a long way that my dad doesn't have to walk. He seems like a nice, professional guy, clean-cut and well-spoken. But then stuff starts to get weird. My dad's exact wording at this part of the story every time that he tells it. And the doctor starts giving my dad the side eye, and seems like he wants to say something but can't quite figure out how to say it. Of course, my dad is just sort of ignoring him because, as he says, I had been on the road for a while and hadn't had a shower or changing clothes in weeks. Then the guy finally comes out and says it. "Can I suck?" My dad was obviously taken aback by this, and he tells him no. "Please, just a little." "No. I'll give you $50 if you let me do it." "No." "How about you let me see it then? Can I see it?" "No. I think you better let me off here." And surprisingly, without any resistance, the guy does. He pulls off at a rest stop and he lets my dad out. Before he pulls away, he hands my dad that $50 and he tells him, "Sorry about that, man. I hope I didn't blow your mind or anything." This isn't super creepy, but I thought you guys might like it. My dad always says that the guy didn't seem like a bad guy, just really messed up. And honestly sorry to have freaked him out so bad. I have no way of knowing if it is totally true, except that my aunt says my dad told her the same story when he got to Florida just a few weeks later.